Revolution at the ballot. Bobi Wine's historic win in Uganda shakes the political landscape. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we bring you in-depth analysis and the latest news shaping Africa's future. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In today's video, we explore Bobi Wine's historic win in Uganda's Kawempe North by-election, a victory that could reshape the country's political landscape. Join us as we break down the impact of this win, compare it with similar movements across Africa, and look ahead to the upcoming 2026 elections. Stay tuned for a deep dive into the political shifts sweeping the continent. In a significant political development, Elias Luyimbazi Nalukoola of the National Unity Platform, NUP, secured a decisive victory in the Kawempe North parliamentary by-election in Kampala, Uganda. Nalukoola garnered 17,764 votes, defeating Farida Nambi-Kigongo of the ruling National Resistance Movement, NRM, who received 8,593 votes. Factors influencing the election outcome. Several key factors contributed to Nalukoola's victory. 1. Opposition. Stronghold. Kawempe North has historically been an opposition stronghold. In the 2021 general elections, the late Mohamed Segerinya, also of NUP, won the seat with 41,197 votes, reflecting robust opposition support in this urban Kampala constituency. 2. Security concerns and voter sentiment. The election was marked by reports of security forces intimidating opposition supporters. NUP leaders, including Bobi Wine, accused a small group of powerful individuals of plundering national resources and oppressing. 3. Voter turnout. The by-election saw a voter turnout of approximately 27,596 out of 28,002 ballots issued. This turnout was significantly lower compared to the 2021 general elections, where over 55,000 votes were cast in the same constituency. This decline may indicate voter apathy or suppression, potentially benefiting the NRM, which has a strong organizational presence. Bobi Wine's perspective. Bobi Wine, the president of NUP, hailed Nalukoola's win as evidence that democratic processes can challenge authoritarianism. He emphasized the importance of casting a protest vote to oppose government actions perceived as unjust. Comparative analysis. Uganda's political landscape. Uganda's political environment has been characterized by a dominant ruling party and a growing opposition presence. The NRM, led by President Yoweri Museveni since 1986, has maintained control through patronage and organizational strength. However, recent elections have shown a shift, with opposition parties like NUP gaining significant support, especially in urban areas. Broader African context. Uganda's political dynamics mirror a broader African trend where opposition parties are increasingly challenging long-standing incumbents. In 2024, several African countries experienced peaceful transitions of power from incumbent presidents to opposition candidates, indicating a strengthening of democratic processes across the continent. Looking ahead. The outcome of the Kawempe North by-election may have several implications. Urban political dynamics. The NUP's success in Kampala suggests a shifting political landscape in urban centers, traditionally strongholds of the NRM. Voter engagement. The low voter turnout highlights the need for increased civic education and efforts to address voter apathy. National elections. The by-election results could influence strategies and voter sentiments in upcoming national elections, as both the NRM and NUP assess their strengths and weaknesses. Elias Luyimbazi Nalukoola's victory in the Kawempe North by-election is a testament to Uganda's evolving political landscape, reflecting both challenges and opportunities for its democratic processes, challenges to democracy and authoritarian trends. While the victory of Elias Luyimbazi Nalukoola is seen as a win for democracy, Uganda's political landscape remains fraught with challenges. One of the biggest hurdles is the persistent dominance of President Yoweri Museveni's National Resistance Movement, NRM. Despite the NUP's increasing influence in urban areas like Kampala, the NRM continues to maintain control over much of the country's rural regions, where Museveni's patronage networks are deeply entrenched. The rural areas, which make up a significant portion of Uganda's electorate, remain a key battleground for both the ruling party and opposition forces. Furthermore, Uganda's political environment remains tightly controlled, with significant restrictions on freedom of speech, assembly, and media. Opposition leaders like Bobi Wine and members of the NUP have faced harassment, arrests, and violence from security forces. These actions often raise concerns about the integrity of the country's electoral process and whether elections can genuinely reflect the will of the people. The harassment of opposition members is part of a broader trend seen in many African nations where leaders manipulate electoral systems, stifle opposition, and use security forces to maintain power. The role of social media and citizen mobilization. Bobi Wine's success in galvanizing the opposition vote has been attributed to his adept use of social media to mobilize citizens, especially among the youth. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp have become essential tools for opposition parties in Uganda to bypass traditional media channels controlled by the state. Bobi Wine, himself a former musician, has effectively used his celebrity status to connect with young Ugandans who feel alienated by the traditional political elites. This digital engagement has proven crucial in reaching urban youth who are more likely to support change and reform. In recent years, however, social media in Uganda has come under scrutiny. The government has attempted to regulate online platforms with measures such as the social media tax and internet shutdowns during critical moments like elections. Despite these efforts to suppress online discourse, platforms remain a crucial lifeline for opposition forces and citizen engagement in the political process. This growing role of digital platforms underscores a broader trend across Africa, where social media and digital mobilization are increasingly central to political movements, particularly for younger, tech-savvy populations. A Pan-African perspective, Uganda's political landscape in context. Uganda's political environment is reflective of broader trends observed across Africa, where the interplay between long-standing regimes and emerging opposition movements is shaping democratic processes. Many African countries, particularly those with entrenched leaderships, have seen increasing political contestation in recent years. In countries like Zimbabwe, Burundi, and Tanzania, long-standing leaders have faced significant opposition, both domestically and from the international community. The success of Bobi Wine in Uganda mirrors the experiences of other opposition leaders across Africa who challenge the status quo, such as Nelson Chamisa in Zimbabwe or Adama Barrow in the Gambia. However, in some countries, the manipulation of electoral processes remains a significant obstacle. In Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu's rise to power in 2021 after the death of John Magufuli saw a shift towards a more moderate approach, but challenges to democratic reforms remain. In many countries across the continent, incumbents use a combination of electoral manipulation, state resources, and legal loopholes to maintain power. This makes it difficult for opposition movements to gain traction despite widespread public dissatisfaction with the ruling governments. Forward-looking approaches, building democratic institutions, and enhancing civic engagement. Looking ahead, Uganda's political future hinges on the country's ability to build democratic institutions that can withstand the pressure from both internal and external forces. While opposition victories like Nalukoola's in Kawempe North signal growing discontent with Museveni's rule, they also highlight the importance of reforming Uganda's electoral system to ensure fair and transparent elections. One area for improvement is the independence of the Electoral Commission. In many African countries, electoral commissions have been criticized for being politically compromised and failing to ensure fair processes. In Uganda, calls for reform have been growing, with demands for a more independent body that can oversee elections without fear or favor. These reforms would help enhance public trust in the electoral process and increase voter participation. Furthermore, Strengthening the role of civil society organizations, CSOs, in Uganda will be crucial for promoting transparency and accountability. CSOs play an essential role in educating voters, monitoring elections, and advocating for electoral reforms. With greater support and freedom, these organizations could further push for democratic change, ensuring that the voice of the people is not drowned out by the interests of the political elite. Looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, the 2026 general elections in Uganda will be a critical test for both the NRM and the opposition. While Bobi Wine's NUP has gained significant ground in recent years, the NRM's control over key institutions remains formidable. As Uganda approaches these elections, it will be crucial for both political parties to consider how they can engage voters and maintain legitimacy in a rapidly changing political environment. For the opposition, the challenge will be to build a broad-based coalition that can unify different factions of society. A divided opposition has historically been one of the main obstacles to challenging the ruling party, and this will need to be addressed in the lead-up to the 2026 elections. On the other hand, the NRM will likely face growing pressure to address issues like corruption, economic inequality, and governance transparency, all of which have become flashpoints for the opposition. The role of international actors such as the African Union, AU, European Union, EU, and United Nations, UN, will also be critical in monitoring the election process to ensure fairness and prevent any backsliding into authoritarianism. The international community's involvement in promoting free and fair elections in Uganda can serve as a stabilizing force, encouraging both sides to adhere to democratic principles. As Uganda prepares for the future, the outcome of the Kawempe North by-election will remain a key point of reference. The election results not only underscore the growing strength of the opposition, but also highlight the resilience of Ugandans in the face of adversity. As Bobi Wine and the NUP continue to challenge the entrenched political establishment, the country stands at a crossroads in its journey toward a more democratic future. However, whether this shift will materialize into a broader movement for change remains to be seen. A deeper look at voter behavior and electoral dynamics. The dynamics of the Kawempe North by-election provide important insights into the current state of Uganda's electoral politics. While the NUP's success is significant, understanding the deeper motivations behind voter behavior is essential for assessing future elections in Uganda and Africa at large. Voters in Kampala, particularly in urban constituencies like Kawempe North, are increasingly disillusioned with the ruling party's approach to governance, which has focused heavily on patronage and control over state institutions. This growing dissatisfaction is evident in the sharp contrast between the NUP's success in urban areas and the NRM's stronghold in rural regions. In many African nations, urban voters, who tend to be more educated and exposed to diverse ideas, are often more politically active and inclined to support opposition parties that promise democratic reforms, transparency, and an end to corruption. This trend is not unique to Uganda. It is observable in countries like Nigeria, where urban centers like Lagos and Abuja have become hotbeds for opposition parties, contrasting sharply with rural regions that remain more sympathetic to long-standing regimes. However, while urban areas are becoming increasingly important for opposition parties, the rural vote remains a critical factor in many African elections. In Uganda, the NRM's grip on rural constituencies is reinforced by a combination of historical loyalty, government support programs, and a strong rural infrastructure network. This situation presents a significant challenge for opposition parties like NUP, which must work hard to break the NRM's dominance in these areas while maintaining their foothold in urban centers. Youth engagement and the role of the Internet in Africa's political transformation. A key takeaway from the Kawempe North by-election is the influence of the youth vote. Young Ugandans, particularly those from urban areas, have been at the forefront of Bobi Wine's NUP, challenging the old guard and calling for a new political era. Across Africa, young people are increasingly becoming the central players in the continent's political transformation. In Uganda, where over 77% of the population is under the age of 30, young people have become a powerful force demanding political and economic reforms that reflect their aspirations for a better future. The internet has played a pivotal role in this shift. Social media platforms have become central to political mobilization, offering a space for citizens to organize, discuss, and advocate for change without fear of state censorship. This digital revolution has been particularly significant in African countries, where traditional media is often controlled or influenced by the state. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp provide an outlet for independent voices and facilitate the flow of information, especially during elections. Bobi Wine's savvy use of social media to connect with the youth and articulate a vision of democratic change has been a key factor in his growing popularity. However, this reliance on digital platforms is not without challenges. Governments in Africa, including Uganda, have increasingly resorted to shutting down the internet or blocking social media platforms to suppress dissent and control political narratives. In the run-up to elections, there are fears that such measures could become more common, particularly in countries where opposition parties are gaining traction. As African countries strive for greater democratic governance, the ability to balance the right to free expression with the need for secure and transparent elections will be crucial. International support for democratic movements. What role for the global community? As Bobi Wine's NUP gains ground, the international community plays an increasingly important role in ensuring the continued progress of democratic reforms in Uganda. The European Union, the United States, and other international organizations have long been vocal in their calls for fair elections and respect for human rights in Uganda. In the aftermath of the 2021 general elections, which saw widespread reports of electoral fraud and violence, the EU and other international bodies imposed sanctions on Uganda, targeting individuals linked to electoral malpractice and human rights abuses. The role of international actors will continue to be crucial in shaping Uganda's political trajectory. However, the effectiveness of external pressure in influencing domestic politics in Uganda is a subject of ongoing debate. While sanctions and diplomatic pressure have had some impact, the Ugandan government has consistently asserted its sovereignty and resisted external interference. This tension between national sovereignty and international pressure is a recurring theme across Africa, where many leaders view foreign intervention as an infringement on their authority. In this context, the international community must carefully consider how to support democratic movements without exacerbating tensions or empowering authoritarian responses. Offering technical assistance to strengthen electoral institutions, providing support for civil society organizations, and facilitating dialogue between the government and opposition could be more effective than punitive measures alone. The NUP and the broader struggle for democracy in Africa. The victory in Kawempe North is part of a broader narrative of political contestation in Africa, where opposition movements are increasingly challenging long-entrenched political elites. In countries like Senegal, Zambia, and Ghana, the transition to more democratic governance has been characterized by peaceful transitions of power, and opposition parties have managed to gain significant ground. These transitions are not without their challenges, but they offer hope for democratic consolidation in Africa. In Uganda, however, the NUP's struggle is emblematic of the challenges that opposition parties face in many African nations, where the ruling party holds a tight grip on the state, using state resources to maintain power. The NUP's victory in Kawempe North does not signify the end of Uganda's political struggle, but it represents a growing movement that is uniting citizens who are dissatisfied with the status quo. The ongoing political contest in Uganda is likely to continue to play out through a combination of grassroots mobilization, digital engagement, and external support for democratic reforms. For the NUP, the challenge will be to build on its victory in Kawempe North and continue to gain traction in other constituencies across the country, while also consolidating the support of youth voters and other key groups. Looking ahead, a changing political landscape in Uganda and beyond. As Uganda approaches its 2026 general elections, the political landscape will undoubtedly continue to evolve. For the NUP and other opposition parties, the task is clear. They must expand their base of support beyond urban areas and engage more effectively with rural voters. Meanwhile, the ruling NRM will need to adapt to the changing political environment, potentially making concessions to maintain its dominance. Across Africa, the struggle for democracy is intensifying, with opposition movements gaining ground in countries where entrenched regimes have long held power. Uganda's experience is a microcosm of this broader trend, and as the NUP's fortunes rise, other African nations will be watching closely to see whether opposition parties can successfully challenge long-standing regimes in the years ahead. The victory of Bobi Wine and his NUP in Kawempe North is a reminder that, despite the significant challenges, democratic forces across Africa continue to push for change. The future of Uganda and the continent will depend on the ability of opposition movements to consolidate support, overcome systemic barriers, and work towards building more inclusive, transparent, and accountable political systems. Strengthening democratic institutions, the role of electoral reforms for Uganda and other African nations undergoing political shifts, the need for stronger and more independent democratic institutions is critical. A key takeaway from the Kawempe North by-election is the role of fair and transparent electoral systems in ensuring the legitimacy of democratic processes. The effectiveness of elections depends not just on the fairness of the vote count, but also on the integrity of the institutions overseeing the process. In Uganda, the Electoral Commission has faced widespread criticism for its lack of independence and the perception that it is influenced by the ruling party. This lack of confidence in the Electoral Commission has undermined the credibility of elections in the past. As Uganda moves forward, particularly with the upcoming 2026 general elections, reforming the Electoral Commission and ensuring its independence is a critical step toward fostering trust in the electoral process. Without such reforms, the opposition will likely continue to view the electoral process as skewed in favor of the ruling party, which may stifle broader participation and engagement. Similarly, the role of the judiciary in maintaining electoral fairness is of paramount importance. In many African countries, judicial bodies tasked with adjudicating electoral disputes often face political pressures that can compromise their independence. Uganda is no exception, as political interference in judicial matters has often cast doubt on the fairness of legal proceedings related to elections. Ensuring the independence of the judiciary and providing mechanisms for peaceful dispute resolution would go a long way toward building a more robust democratic system. Youth and women's involvement, a renewed political energy. Another significant factor in Uganda's political shift is the increasing involvement of youth and women in politics. The youth population, comprising over 70% of Uganda's total population, is a crucial demographic for determining the country's political future. In recent elections, young people have proven to be a driving force behind the opposition, particularly through their support for Bobi Wine's NUP. These young voters are seeking greater opportunities, better education, and more inclusive political representation. Women, too, have played a critical role in the election process, both as voters and candidates. In the 2021 elections, the number of female candidates increased, and the emergence of female opposition leaders has been a significant development in Uganda's political landscape. The NUP, under Bobi Wine's leadership, has sought to empower women in its ranks, offering them leadership positions and ensuring their visibility in the party's activities. This move reflects broader trends in African politics, where women are increasingly breaking through traditional political barriers to assert themselves in leadership roles. This growing political participation from both youth and women presents an opportunity to redefine Uganda's political future. The challenge remains to ensure that their voices are not marginalized or co-opted by the traditional political elites, and that they continue to have a real influence on shaping the country's democratic institutions and policies. The role of media and press freedom remains a major challenge for democracy in Uganda, as media outlets are frequently subject to harassment, censorship, and closure by the government. This was especially evident during the 2021 elections, when several independent media outlets were blocked, and journalists faced violence and intimidation while covering the opposition. The media plays an essential role in any democracy by holding governments accountable and providing a platform for the free exchange of ideas. In Uganda, the government has long sought to control the narrative through state-run media, limiting the ability of the public to access diverse viewpoints. The emergence of digital media platforms, such as social media and online news outlets, has provided a channel for independent reporting and opposition viewpoints to be heard, but these platforms are also under increasing pressure from the government. The challenge for Uganda, and for many African nations, is how to ensure that the media can operate freely without fear of reprisal. Press freedom is often the first casualty in authoritarian regimes, and its suppression undermines the democratic fabric of society. For Uganda, strengthening media laws, providing protections for journalists, and fostering a more pluralistic media environment will be essential steps in ensuring a healthy democratic culture. International dynamics, Africa's democratic aspirations. Uganda's political struggles are not just a reflection of domestic issues, but also part of a broader African narrative where the continent is grappling with the balance between authoritarianism and democracy. In the past decade, many African countries have experienced political transitions, with some moving toward greater democratic freedom and others backsliding into authoritarian practices. Uganda's case is not unique. Countries like Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Guinea have also faced challenges in their efforts to transition away from autocratic rule. However, the rise of opposition movements across Africa, coupled with increasing youth engagement and greater media freedom, suggests that there is a growing democratic movement that cannot be ignored. International actors, such as the African Union, AU, the European Union, EU, and other regional bodies, will play a significant role in supporting democratic efforts. These bodies can provide diplomatic pressure, technical assistance, and support for electoral reforms that will help ensure fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power. Additionally, Uganda's experience underscores the need for African-led solutions to the continent's political challenges. While international support is important, African leaders and institutions must take the lead in advancing democratic reforms and holding governments accountable. The creation of regional mechanisms that monitor elections, promote transparency, and facilitate peaceful conflict resolution will be critical in strengthening democracy on the continent. The importance of civil society and grassroots movements. Civil society in Uganda has been a critical force in holding the government accountable and pushing for political reforms. From human rights organizations to grassroots movements advocating for social change, Uganda's civil society is active and vocal in calling for better governance. In the context of Bobi Wine's NUP, civil society organizations have been essential in educating the public about their rights, mobilizing voters, and pushing back against state repression. However, civil society organizations in Uganda, as in many other African countries, face significant challenges. The government has sought to silence dissent by enacting restrictive laws that target NGOs and activists, and many civil society actors face harassment, imprisonment, or worse. The resilience of Uganda's civil society in the face of such challenges is commendable, but much more needs to be done to protect the rights of activists and ensure that they can operate without fear of persecution. Grassroots movements have the potential to bring about meaningful change, but their success often depends on the ability to organize effectively, secure funding, and navigate the political landscape. As Uganda continues to evolve politically, it will be essential for civil society organizations to play a pivotal role in shaping the country's democratic trajectory and ensuring that the government is held accountable to its citizens. Looking beyond Uganda, the continent's path toward democracy. Uganda's political struggle is not just about one country. It reflects the broader struggles for democracy across Africa. The continent has made significant strides toward democracy in recent years, but the road ahead is fraught with challenges. Many African countries are still grappling with authoritarian regimes that undermine democratic norms, while others have made progress in strengthening democratic institutions and promoting peaceful transitions of power. As Bobi Wine and the NUP continue to push for democratic change, their efforts will be closely watched by opposition leaders and political movements across Africa. Uganda's experience could serve as both a warning and a source of inspiration for other African countries seeking to challenge entrenched power structures. It highlights the importance of a vibrant civil society, the need for electoral reforms, and the role of youth in shaping the future of African politics. Ultimately, the future of Uganda and of Africa depends on the ability of its people to continue fighting for democratic principles and holding their governments accountable. The struggle for democracy is ongoing, but each victory, no matter how small, is a step toward a more just and inclusive political system. The economic dimension of political change. As Uganda grapples with its political struggles, it is essential to consider the economic implications of these dynamics. The political environment in Uganda, marked by a long-standing ruling party, a rising opposition movement, and ongoing electoral controversies, has profound effects on the country's economic development. Uganda, like many African nations, faces significant challenges related to poverty, unemployment, and income inequality. These challenges are often exacerbated by political instability and lack of effective governance. A key economic issue in Uganda is the distribution of wealth and resources. For many Ugandans, particularly in rural areas, the lack of access to quality education, healthcare, and employment opportunities continues to fuel discontent. This economic disparity is often used by opposition parties, like Bobi Wine's NUP, to mobilize support, positioning themselves as champions of the disenfranchised. During his presidential campaigns, Bobi Wine emphasized the need for economic reforms that would create jobs, reduce corruption, and ensure that the country's wealth is more equitably distributed. The success of opposition parties like NUP in urban areas where there is a higher concentration of educated voters reflects the electorate's desire for economic policies that promote growth and social welfare. However, the economic reforms proposed by opposition movements often face resistance from the ruling party, which controls much of the country's business infrastructure and government spending. The NRM's approach has centered around infrastructure development, particularly in road construction and energy, but many critics argue that these projects disproportionately benefit the political elite, while neglecting the needs of ordinary citizens. The key challenge for Uganda's political future will be to ensure that economic policies not only focus on large-scale infrastructure projects, but also address systemic issues like unemployment, poverty, and access to basic services. In the context of Africa, Uganda's political economic struggles are not unique. Across the continent, many countries face a similar tension between the need for democratic reforms and the pressures of economic development. While economic growth rates in Africa have generally been strong in recent years, the benefits of this growth have not always been equally distributed. The challenge for African countries like Uganda is to build economies that are not just growing, but are also inclusive and sustainable. As political movements like NUP continue to gain traction, they will need to focus not just on political freedoms, but also on tangible economic improvements that improve the livelihoods of ordinary citizens. The role of international trade and investment. As Uganda moves forward politically, its economic future will depend heavily on the international community's support, particularly in terms of trade and investment. Uganda is rich in natural resources, including oil and minerals, but the country has faced challenges in fully exploiting these resources due to political instability, corruption, and inadequate infrastructure. Foreign direct investment, FDI, plays a crucial role in stimulating economic growth in Uganda, but political uncertainty often makes it difficult for investors to feel confident in the country's long-term stability. In recent years, the Ugandan government has focused on attracting foreign investment, particularly in the energy sector, where large oil reserves are expected to significantly boost the country's economy. However, concerns about governance and corruption have led some foreign investors to exercise caution, and the slow pace of development in some areas has led to questions about the country's ability to fully capitalize on its resources. If opposition movements like NUP are to take power, they will likely need to address these concerns head-on. For Bobi Wine's NUP, economic reforms would need to include measures to reduce corruption, improve transparency, and create an environment that is conducive to both domestic and foreign investment. Ensuring that the benefits of Uganda's economic development reach all segments of society will be key to their success. Moreover, Uganda's integration into regional trade blocs like the East African Community, EAC, could offer significant economic opportunities. Regional integration is a key strategy for enhancing trade, improving infrastructure, and strengthening economic ties with neighboring countries. Uganda's political future will also depend on how well it can navigate its role within the broader East African economic landscape. Regional and global perspectives, how Uganda fits into Africa's political landscape. Uganda's political trajectory cannot be viewed in isolation. It is part of a broader African context where the struggle between autocracy and democracy is playing out across the continent. The increasing contestation of long-standing authoritarian regimes in countries like Zimbabwe, Sudan, and Gabon reflects a broader trend where Africans are seeking greater democratic participation and accountability from their leaders. In Uganda, as in other parts of Africa, the youth have become a central force in pushing for political change. One of the most striking features of this movement is the role of social media in African political struggles. As in other countries where long-standing regimes face opposition, platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have become powerful tools for organizing protests, spreading political messages, and calling attention to abuses of power. Bobi Wine's success in galvanizing the youth vote in Uganda is emblematic of this trend, as young people use digital tools to amplify their voices in the political arena. However, the digital revolution is not without its challenges. Governments in many African countries, including Uganda, have responded to the rise of social media with efforts to restrict access to the internet, shut down platforms during critical elections, or monitor online activity. These actions often aim to stifle dissent and prevent opposition movements from organizing and mobilizing effectively. The future of political engagement in Africa will likely depend on the ability of governments to strike a balance between maintaining security and respecting the right to free expression. Uganda's political environment is also shaped by its relationships with neighboring countries and regional powers. For example, the African Union, AU, and other regional organizations have played a role in overseeing elections, promoting peace, and supporting democratic transitions across Africa. Uganda's involvement in these regional initiatives will be a critical factor in shaping its political future. The country has historically had strong ties to countries like Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, but its political future will also depend on how it engages with the broader regional landscape, particularly in terms of promoting stability and democratic governance. The road ahead, challenges and opportunities. Looking forward, Uganda faces both significant challenges and opportunities. The political contest between the ruling NRM and the opposition, particularly the NUP, will continue to be a defining feature of the country's political landscape. For the NUP, the challenge will be to build on the momentum of the Kawempe North by-election victory and translate it into broader electoral success. This will require the party to engage with voters across the country, address economic concerns, and build a coalition that can challenge the NRM's hold on power. For the NRM, the upcoming 2026 elections will be a critical test of its ability to maintain its political dominance. While the ruling party has a strong organizational base and control over key institutions, it faces mounting pressure from the opposition and growing dissatisfaction among the population particularly in urban areas. Ultimately, Uganda's political future will depend on the ability of its people to demand greater accountability, push for democratic reforms, and ensure that their voices are heard in the political process. As opposition movements like the NUP continue to challenge the status quo, they will face significant obstacles, but their rise signals a growing demand for political change. The future of Uganda, and of Africa, will be shaped by the continued struggle for democracy, transparency, and social justice. The role of political alliances and coalition building. For Bobi Wine's NUP and other opposition parties in Uganda, forging political alliances and coalitions will be crucial to sustaining their momentum and ensuring their relevance in future elections. In the past, Uganda's political opposition has often struggled to unite under a common cause due to ideological differences, regionalism, and personal rivalries. The opposition's lack of unity has allowed the ruling NRM party to maintain dominance, even in the face of growing public discontent. The importance of building broad coalitions across Uganda's political spectrum cannot be overstated. For opposition parties to effectively challenge the NRM, they must present a unified front that can garner widespread support from voters across different demographics. This includes not only young people, who are currently the most politically active group, but also rural voters who have traditionally been loyal to the NRM. While this task is undoubtedly challenging, it is not impossible. Across Africa, we have seen opposition parties that were once fragmented unite to mount strong challenges to ruling governments, such as the coalition efforts in countries like Senegal, Zambia, and Ivory Coast. Moreover, opposition coalitions in Uganda must be inclusive, incorporating marginalized groups such as women, ethnic minorities, and indigenous communities, who often feel sidelined by both the government and mainstream political parties. By doing so, opposition parties can appeal to a broader electorate, which is essential for challenging the NRM's grip on power. The formation of coalitions also provides an opportunity for political parties to pool resources, strategize more effectively, and share the risks and rewards of electoral campaigns. The future of Uganda's electoral system, reform or stagnation. As Uganda approaches the 2026 general elections, discussions around electoral reforms will undoubtedly intensify. For the opposition, the ability to challenge the NRM's control of the electoral process is paramount. In recent years, allegations of voter fraud, electoral violence, and manipulation of election results have plagued Uganda's elections. Such issues have led many Ugandans to question the legitimacy of the electoral process, creating an atmosphere of mistrust between the government and its citizens. In this context, electoral reforms are crucial to ensuring that future elections are free, fair, and transparent. These reforms could include improving the independence of the Electoral Commission, strengthening the transparency of the voting process, enhancing voter education, and creating more robust mechanisms for addressing electoral disputes. Additionally, electoral reforms should aim to ensure that all political parties, including opposition groups, have equal access to the media, campaign resources, and electoral platforms. An important aspect of electoral reform in Uganda is the modernization of the voting system. Currently, Uganda's electoral system is susceptible to manipulation due to outdated technologies and inefficiencies in voter registration. Embracing modern technologies, such as biometric voter registration and digital voting systems, could reduce fraud and increase voter confidence in the electoral process. However, implementing such reforms would require substantial investment and political will, both of which are likely to face resistance from the ruling party, which benefits from the status quo. Economic reforms, a key pillar for political change. Political change cannot occur in a vacuum, and Uganda's political reforms will need to be accompanied by significant economic changes. In many African countries, economic grievances are often closely tied to political dissatisfaction, and this is particularly true in Uganda. Economic inequality, high levels of unemployment, and insufficient access to basic services have fueled public discontent and become central issues for opposition movements like the NUP. Addressing these economic challenges will be critical for any opposition party seeking to gain the trust and support of Ugandans. For Bobi Wine's NUP, implementing economic reforms that address the needs of most of the population will be essential. These reforms could include improving job opportunities for young people, reducing corruption, promoting sustainable development, and creating policies that support small businesses. Uganda's economy, which heavily relies on agriculture and oil exports, must diversify to reduce its vulnerability to global price fluctuations and ensure long-term growth. Addressing economic inequality through progressive taxation and increased public investment in education and healthcare will help reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, thus promoting more inclusive growth. The role of foreign aid and investment in Uganda's economic reforms will also be crucial. International actors, including development organizations, foreign governments, and multinational corporations, can provide the necessary financial and technical support to help Uganda achieve its economic goals. However, foreign aid should not be used as a tool of political influence, but rather to support democratic governance and sustainable development. The role of education in political engagement. Education is one of the most powerful tools for shaping Uganda's political future. A well-educated electorate is better equipped to make informed decisions, hold politicians accountable, and participate in democratic processes. Unfortunately, Uganda's education system has been plagued by issues such as overcrowded classrooms, a lack of resources, and limited access to quality education, particularly in rural areas. These issues have made it difficult for many Ugandans to fully engage in the political process. For the NUP and other opposition movements, investing in education could be a way to empower citizens and build a more politically aware electorate. This investment could focus on improving the quality of education at all levels, from primary through tertiary, ensuring that all Ugandans have access to the skills and knowledge necessary to participate in democratic processes. Furthermore, promoting civic education is critical for encouraging greater voter participation, especially among young people who may be disillusioned with the political system. The future of Uganda's democracy will depend on how well the education system can prepare citizens to engage with politics in a meaningful way. By providing access to education and fostering political literacy, Uganda can build a more informed and engaged citizenry, which will be better equipped to demand democratic reforms and ensure that future elections are free and fair. The role of international pressure. Should the world intervene? As Uganda continues to navigate its political struggles, the role of the international community cannot be overlooked. International organizations like the United Nations, the African Union, and the European Union have a significant role to play in encouraging political reforms and holding the Ugandan government accountable. The 2021 elections in Uganda were marred by allegations of fraud, violence, and intimidation, drawing international condemnation. For Uganda, continued international attention and pressure will be crucial in maintaining momentum toward democratic change. However, this pressure must be balanced with respect for Uganda's sovereignty and an understanding of the country's unique political context. While sanctions and diplomatic measures can be effective in sending a message to the Ugandan government, they must be used judiciously to avoid backfiring and further entrenching the regime. Additionally, international actors should focus on supporting civil society organizations, which are often the most effective agents of change in authoritarian environments. The global community can also help Uganda by promoting the establishment of democratic norms and providing technical assistance in areas such as electoral reform, governance, and human rights. The support of international bodies can play a key role in fostering political dialogue, encouraging peaceful conflict resolution, and facilitating Uganda's transition toward a more democratic future. A path toward a more democratic Uganda. As Uganda prepares for its future, the challenges it faces are formidable but not insurmountable. The success of opposition movements like the NUP in recent elections, such as the Kawempe North by-election, signals a shift in the country's political landscape. However, this change will require continued efforts to build democratic institutions, engage the youth and marginalized groups, and implement comprehensive economic reforms that address the needs of the population. The road ahead for Uganda is one of both political and economic transformation. While significant obstacles remain, the growing opposition movement, combined with regional and international support, provides hope that Uganda can transition toward a more inclusive, transparent, and accountable government. Ultimately, the future of Uganda will depend on the collective efforts of its people, particularly the youth, to demand the changes necessary to build a more democratic and prosperous nation. Building political legitimacy and trust. As Uganda moves forward in its political trajectory, one of the key challenges that both the NRM and NUP face is building political legitimacy and restoring public trust in the political system. This is especially crucial given the history of political violence, suppression of dissent, and lack of transparency in previous elections. Trust in Uganda's electoral process is at an all-time low, and restoring it will require both institutional and systemic reforms. For Bobi Wine and the NUP, gaining political legitimacy will involve not only securing electoral victories, but also demonstrating a commitment to democratic principles once in power. This includes ensuring that the rights of opposition parties, journalists, and civil society are respected, allowing for open political debate and free speech. The NRM, on the other hand, will need to prove its commitment to democratic principles by addressing allegations of corruption, electoral malpractice, and abuse of power. A significant step in this process would be a shift toward greater political inclusivity. Both the NRM and NUP must look beyond their core supporters and appeal to the broadest sections of Ugandan society. A national reconciliation process that addresses the divisions in Ugandan society, from ethnic to political divides, could go a long way in promoting peace and unity. The success of future elections depends not only on the fairness of the process, but also on the inclusivity of political space. If the system is seen as catering only to a particular group, the legitimacy of the elections will continue to be questioned. Fostering a political culture of accountability. One of the biggest challenges for Uganda, and indeed many African nations, is the culture of impunity that has plagued political systems for decades. In Uganda, corruption has been pervasive, and the political class often seems detached from the needs of the general population. The government's ability to deliver services, healthcare, education, clean water has often been hindered by corruption at all levels of government. This undermines trust in the ruling party and makes it easier for opposition parties to rally support as people become disillusioned with the status quo. For Uganda to make real progress, it must foster a culture of accountability at all levels of governance. This can be achieved by implementing stronger anti-corruption measures, ensuring that public officials are held accountable for their actions, and providing independent institutions with the tools and autonomy they need to operate effectively. Uganda's Auditor General, for example, plays an important role in identifying corruption in the public sector, but the office lacks sufficient independence and resources to fulfill its mandate effectively. Strengthening these independent bodies will be crucial in curbing corruption and ensuring that public funds are used for the benefit of the people. Moreover, political accountability must extend beyond the government to include the opposition. While opposition parties like NUP have successfully capitalized on public dissatisfaction with the NRM, they too must demonstrate their commitment to integrity and transparency. It is important for Uganda's political opposition to act as a credible alternative, free of corruption, nepotism, and the same political practices that they criticize the ruling party for. The NUP's ability to maintain a clean record and serve the interests of all Ugandans will be crucial if it hopes to earn the trust of voters. Strengthening the role of parliament and local governance. One of the key challenges for Uganda's democracy is the weakness of the legislature and the lack of local governance autonomy. Uganda's parliament has often been accused of being a rubber stamp for President Museveni's policies, and many MPs have been seen as more loyal to the president than to their constituents. This has eroded public faith in the legislative process and led to a disconnect between the people and their elected representatives. For Uganda to develop a truly democratic political system, Parliament must be strengthened and made more responsive to the people's needs. This includes ensuring that MPs are more accountable to their constituents and that their decisions are transparent. Furthermore, local governance structures must be empowered to take on a greater role in delivering services and managing resources at the grassroots level. Decentralizing power and resources to local governments can help improve service delivery and ensure that Uganda's development is more equitable across all regions. Devolving power to local governments could also encourage more civic participation and create a sense of ownership over local political processes. This would help foster a more inclusive political culture and give Ugandans a greater say in how their communities are governed. The role of education in shaping democratic values. A thriving democracy is built upon an informed and engaged citizenry. Education plays a crucial role in fostering democratic values and political awareness. In Uganda, where the education system faces challenges like overcrowded classrooms, poor infrastructure, and a shortage of qualified teachers, many young people remain disconnected from political life. While Bobi Wine and the NUP have made great strides in mobilizing youth voters, there is a need for continued investment in civic education to ensure that future generations understand the importance of their participation in the democratic process. The government, along with civil society organizations, must invest in educating young people about their rights and responsibilities as citizens. Civic education programs in schools, universities, and communities can help young people understand the political system, encourage them to vote, and teach them how to hold elected officials accountable. Such initiatives are essential in ensuring that Uganda's young voters do not just participate in elections, but also become active agents of change in their communities. The potential for Pan-African solidarity in Uganda's political struggle. Uganda's political journey is not just important for the country itself, but also for the wider African continent. As Uganda grapples with its political future, it offers lessons for other African countries facing similar struggles for democracy. The rise of opposition movements, particularly those led by young people, signals a shift in Africa's political landscape, where the youth are increasingly taking center stage in demanding democratic reforms. In this context, Uganda's political landscape is intertwined with the broader African struggle for freedom, democracy, and justice. Pan-African solidarity can play a crucial role in supporting Uganda's efforts to build a more democratic political system. Regional organizations like the African Union, AU, and the East African Community, EAC, can provide valuable diplomatic support, monitor elections, and encourage dialogue between the government and opposition. Furthermore, lessons from countries like South Africa, Ghana, and Botswana, where democratic processes have been successfully institutionalized, can offer Uganda useful models for reform. The need for long-term democratic commitment. Ultimately, Uganda's path to a more democratic and prosperous future will depend on long-term commitment from all sectors of society: government, opposition, civil society, and the public. While political victories like those seen in Kawempe North may signal hope for the opposition, sustaining this momentum will require addressing the root causes of political discontent: corruption, lack of service delivery, and the erosion of democratic principles. For Bobi Wine's NUP and other political movements, the goal must be more than just an electoral victory. True democratic progress involves building a political system that is accountable, transparent, and inclusive, where power is transferred peacefully and the rights of all citizens are protected. Only then can Uganda hope to realize its full potential as a stable, prosperous, and democratic nation. As the country moves toward the 2026 general elections, the struggle for democracy will intensify. Whether the political environment will shift toward greater freedom and inclusiveness, or fall back into authoritarian practices, will depend on the actions of all Ugandans. But one thing is certain. The fight for a better future is far from over, and the path forward requires sustained effort, vigilance, and unity among Uganda's people. The importance of electoral monitoring and international oversight. As Uganda prepares for future elections, one of the most crucial elements in ensuring the legitimacy of the electoral process is robust electoral monitoring. Election observers, both domestic and international, play a vital role in ensuring that elections are free, fair, and transparent. In the past, Uganda has faced criticism for irregularities during elections, including accusations of vote rigging, voter intimidation, and restricted access for independent election observers. The presence of both local and international observers can help counteract these issues and ensure that the election results are credible. International organizations such as the European Union, EU, and the United Nations, UN, can contribute to this process by sending election monitoring teams, providing financial and technical support for electoral reforms, and offering a platform for international dialogue about the health of Uganda's democracy. Similarly, regional organizations like the African Union, AU, and the East African Community, EAC, have a critical role to play. These organizations can not only observe elections but also encourage democratic dialogue and mediate conflicts in the event of disputed election results. For Uganda's opposition parties, including the NUP, international oversight serves as a safeguard against government manipulation of the electoral process. It helps ensure that the playing field is as level as possible and that their supporters are not disenfranchised or subjected to intimidation tactics. However, monitoring alone is not enough. It is equally important that the Ugandan government takes responsibility for implementing and adhering to electoral reforms, ensuring that elections are not only observed but also genuinely fair. Rethinking governance, a new vision for Uganda's future. The political landscape in Uganda is undeniably shifting. As the opposition strengthens and new political movements gain traction, there is an appetite for change within the country. Bobi Wine and the NUP's success in urban areas such as Kampala suggests that the Ugandan electorate is increasingly seeking democratic alternatives to the long-standing dominance of the NRM. However, while this growing opposition movement is promising, it must focus on more than just contesting elections. It must also present a coherent vision for governance that addresses the deep-rooted issues facing Uganda. To create a more inclusive and participatory government, the NUP and other political parties must look beyond the election cycle and consider long-term solutions for Uganda's political, economic, and social challenges. This includes developing policies that promote economic growth, reduce inequality, and provide equal access to essential services for all citizens, regardless of their geographic location or political affiliation. A more equitable distribution of resources is essential for creating a stable and sustainable democracy. In Uganda, the urban-rural divide remains a significant challenge. While Kampala is growing rapidly as an economic and political center, much of the rural population continues to feel marginalized, with limited access to healthcare, education, and employment opportunities. To create a truly inclusive political system, future governments must prioritize policies that bridge this gap, ensuring that both urban and rural populations benefit equally from Uganda's development. Furthermore, embracing decentralization of governance is key to building stronger local governments that are more responsive to the needs of citizens. Empowering local authorities to make decisions that directly affect their communities would foster greater political participation and engagement at the grassroots level, which is crucial for deepening Uganda's democracy. The importance of political will for sustainable change. While political movements like the NUP have raised the hopes of many Ugandans seeking change, achieving sustainable reform requires more than just popular support. It demands political will. The NRM, despite its political dominance, faces mounting pressure to adopt reforms that address the widespread dissatisfaction with its governance. However, for meaningful change to occur, It is essential that both the ruling party and opposition parties demonstrate a commitment to political and social transformation. Political will means that the leadership must be willing to challenge entrenched interests, whether they are from within the political elite, the business sector, or the military. In Uganda, like in many other African countries, political leaders often hold on to power by maintaining control over key sectors of the economy and state institutions. To break this cycle of entrenched power and inequality, leaders must be willing to relinquish some of their control, promote competition, and open space for opposition and civil society actors to play a more active role. For the NUP and other opposition parties, the challenge is twofold. Not only must they campaign effectively to win elections, but they must also prepare to lead with integrity and transparency once in power. This means working to restore trust in Uganda's democratic institutions, creating a government that prioritizes the rule of law, and addressing issues such as corruption, human rights abuses, and government accountability. The NUP's political success in urban areas is encouraging, but it will need to translate this momentum into meaningful policy proposals that address the structural problems facing Uganda's governance. The role of international trade and foreign relations. As Uganda moves toward greater political stability, its international relationships will play an increasingly important role in shaping the country's future. Foreign relations, especially with neighboring countries and international financial institutions, will be pivotal in ensuring Uganda's economic growth and political development. The Ugandan government must focus on fostering diplomatic ties that promote regional stability and cooperation. Uganda's relationship with other East African countries, such as Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, is vital to ensuring peace and economic integration in the region. Trade agreements, cross-border investments, and regional partnerships in sectors such as agriculture, energy, and infrastructure can help boost Uganda's economy and create jobs. However, Uganda must also be cautious in its dealings with foreign powers. It is crucial that the country pursues a foreign policy that prioritizes its national interests while avoiding overdependence on external actors. The increasing presence of China in Africa, for example, has raised concerns about the long-term implications of foreign investment in critical sectors, such as infrastructure and energy. Moreover, Uganda's relationships with international bodies like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the African Development Bank, AFDB, will be central to securing financial support for development projects. However, Uganda's leadership must ensure that loans and investments from these institutions are used responsibly and for the benefit of the people rather than being siphoned off by corrupt officials. Youth engagement, the driving force for change. In Uganda, as across much of Africa, the youth have become a driving force for political change. The youth population in Uganda is vast, with a median age of around 16 years, and this demographic is not just a passive observer of political events. It is active, engaged, and increasingly dissatisfied with the status quo. Young Ugandans are more educated and globally connected than ever before, and they are demanding a government that works for them and addresses their needs. The success of Bobi Wine's NUP among young voters demonstrates the growing political consciousness of this demographic. The challenge for both the NUP and the NRM is to ensure that youth participation in the political process goes beyond just voting. There is a need for greater representation of youth in leadership roles, both within political parties and government institutions. The inclusion of young people in decision-making processes will ensure that policies reflect the aspirations and needs of most of the population. It is also essential that young Ugandans are provided with more opportunities for education, employment, and political engagement. Youth-led organizations and grassroots movements have the potential to influence Uganda's political future, but they need support in terms of resources, training, and access to platforms that allow them to articulate their concerns and advocate for change. A continuing struggle for democracy and prosperity. Uganda stands at a crossroads in its journey toward a more democratic and prosperous future. While recent political victories by opposition movements like the NUP offer hope, the road to a truly democratic Uganda is long and fraught with challenges. The country must address the structural issues that have allowed authoritarianism to persist, including corruption, the control of state institutions, and the suppression of dissent. For Uganda's democracy to thrive, it will require a concerted effort from all sectors of society: the government, opposition parties, civil society, and the people. The youth will play a central role in shaping the country's future, and their energy, creativity, and demands for change must not be ignored. The next steps for Uganda will involve not only securing free and fair elections, but also ensuring that the governance system is inclusive, accountable, and responsive to the needs of all citizens. This will require deep political reforms, economic investments, and international support. If Uganda can overcome these challenges, it will serve as an example for the rest of Africa, a nation that, despite its struggles, remains determined to build a more just and democratic future. The role of national dialogue and reconciliation. For Uganda, and many African nations grappling with political tension, national dialogue and reconciliation are essential for moving beyond conflict and building lasting peace. Uganda's political history, marked by political violence, civil unrest, and divisive rhetoric, has left deep scars in the country's social fabric. Achieving genuine reconciliation is not just about political agreements, but also about healing wounds, fostering unity, and promoting social cohesion among different groups. A national dialogue that involves all sectors of society: government, opposition, civil society, youth, women, and marginalized groups, could serve as a crucial step toward addressing the deep divisions in Uganda. The dialogue should focus on creating a shared vision for Uganda's future based on democratic values, national unity, and social justice. The involvement of religious leaders, elders, and other respected figures in society can help mediate differences and build trust among the different factions. This national dialogue should also be designed to create a clear and actionable roadmap for electoral reforms, the decentralization of power, and economic policies that benefit the entire population. By fostering a culture of dialogue, inclusivity, and reconciliation, Uganda can reduce political polarization and move towards building a more democratic and prosperous future. Adapting to regional and global challenges. As Uganda navigates its internal political dynamics, it must also remain mindful of the broader regional and global context. The challenges faced by Uganda, ranging from economic instability to political repression, are shared by many African nations. Regional cooperation and solidarity will be vital in addressing these challenges and achieving sustainable development. Regional bodies like the East African Community, EAC, must continue to support Uganda's democratic efforts, offering platforms for dialogue, conflict resolution, and collaboration in areas like trade, security, and infrastructure. The African Union, AU, also has a pivotal role to play in promoting democratic principles and holding African governments accountable. African countries must work together to ensure that the continent's growth is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable, with a strong commitment to democratic governance. Globally, Uganda must continue to engage with international partners to foster economic growth and development. However, Uganda must also ensure that it remains sovereign and independent in its decision-making, resisting external pressures that could undermine its democratic processes. International engagement should focus on strengthening Uganda's democratic institutions, supporting civil society, and promoting human rights. Advice to African leaders: a call for visionary leadership. To African leaders, the key message is clear. Africa's future lies in the hands of its people, and true leadership is about serving the public interest, not personal or political gain. It is essential for leaders to embrace transparency, accountability, and inclusive governance to build trust with the citizens they serve. The people of Africa are increasingly demanding more from their leaders, and the traditional model of authoritarianism or complacency is no longer acceptable. Leaders must prioritize the development of democratic institutions and support political pluralism. This includes respecting the rights of opposition parties, ensuring a free press, and fostering a political culture based on the rule of law. By doing so, African leaders can create an environment where democracy thrives and citizens can freely participate in shaping the future of their countries. Moreover, African leaders should lead by example in promoting good governance and fighting corruption. The future of Africa depends on reducing corruption, enhancing public sector efficiency, and creating systems that hold leaders accountable for their actions. A robust and independent judiciary, an empowered legislature, and a vibrant civil society are all essential components of a functioning democracy. Summary of key messages. Uganda's political evolution, highlighted by Bobi Wine's NUP victory in the Kawempe North by-election, signals the growing demand for democratic change across the country. As Uganda moves towards future elections and political reforms, several critical lessons emerge. 1. Democratic development. The need for electoral reforms, greater transparency, and the strengthening of democratic institutions is vital for ensuring that Uganda's political system remains fair and credible. 2. Youth and inclusivity. Young people are at the forefront of Uganda's political shift. It is crucial to ensure that youth and marginalized groups are not only involved in elections, but are also included in the political decision-making process. 3. Economic and social justice. For Uganda to move forward, the government must focus on reducing inequality, providing equitable access to services, and promoting sustainable economic growth that benefits all sectors of society. 4. Regional cooperation. Uganda's political future will be influenced by its relationship with neighboring countries and regional organizations. Regional cooperation is key for fostering peace, economic integration, and democratic governance. 5. Global engagement. Uganda must balance international relations while maintaining sovereignty, engaging with international partners to support democratic and economic development without compromising its autonomy. 6. Leadership for change. African leaders must embrace visionary leadership, prioritize the needs of their citizens, and actively work towards fostering democratic, inclusive governance. In conclusion, the path ahead for Uganda and Africa as a whole is one of both challenges and opportunity. The drive for democracy, accountability, and social justice is undeniable, and it is imperative for political leaders to respond to these demands with bold, forward-thinking strategies that place the well-being of the people at the heart of governance. Uganda's journey is emblematic of Africa's broader struggle for freedom, democracy, and prosperity, one that will require collective effort, resilience, and a steadfast commitment to building a more inclusive and democratic future. Thank you for tuning into the Bold African Voice, BAV. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content on Africa's most pressing political developments. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think Bobi Wine's victory will affect Uganda's political future? Stay informed, stay bold, and let's continue the conversation. Until next time.